for staying with us. Now we're shifting attention to the United States, where the trade regulatory rules are still mounting pressure on the economies of many nations. The United States President Donald Trump recently imposed deep tariffs on exports from dozens of trading partners, including Canada, Brazil, India, and Taiwan. According to his latest executive order, the rates include a 35% duty on many goods from Canada, 50% for Brazil, 25% for India, 20% for Taiwan, and 39% for Switzerland. With the new rates, goods from all other countries not listed will be subject to 10% U.S. import tax. President Trump also issued a separate order on trade with Canada, raising the tariff rate on the country's goods to 35% from the previous 25%. Now, for more on President Trump's trade regulation rules orchestrating pressure on national economies, his policies since he took office, global affairs analyst Ejike Okpa joins me right here in the studio for in-depth analysis. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, I want to start because I know you are a Republican. You're very supportive of the Republican Party.
Yes.
But I also, again, we've had a mixed review of the Trump administration since he took office. Yes. But I want to get your thoughts on what you make of his policies so far.
Thank you for having me. No president in the history of America has done what Trump has done in less than 7 months, about 7 months being in office.
Is that positive or negative?
Well, it's good. He moves at the speed of light, and he's doing this thing because, he has been there for the first time. So now, this in a second missionary journey, and in fact, on my own assessment, it's good that he didn't win the second term because he took a break. And now he comes back more energized, more focused, and then given the mandate he got from the election in November, he is more prompted to do stuff. The case of tariff is not the end of a deal; it's the beginning of a deal. So Trump, when he announces this tariff, all he's looking for is for the countries that are going to be affected to step up and get into a conversation or negotiation, but it's not the end of it. But what I have seen is a lot of countries are getting rattled on ease. Well, that's not what it is. It is all the act of the deal, and how do we get into the deal? And recently, the U.S. Treasury announced a $100 billion revenue. Tariff is a tax on goods, and it goes to the government. So any country has the right to tax what comes into their country. And if you don't like, you don't have to deal with them.
Are countries getting rattled or they are getting offended? Because for some of these countries, they've been allies of the U.S. And some of these relationships have been based on reciprocity. You charge us this way, we charge you this way. And so to find that there is an increase, which also has its impact negatively, on prices of goods in the U.S., is that a benefit, or is that good for America?
I mean, it's good. I mean, look, every nation is independent, but this independence also has to be relevant to the ability of your bilateral relationships. And that's what Trump is trying to say. We are not in a we are in a global village where we are still individual countries. So Trump comes up and said, hey, America has a trade deficit because we've allowed countries to sell things to us and they are not buying from us. We said nobody wants to do that. So we're saying, hey, come into America, sell to us, and then we'll buy from you. If it's going to be a one-way traffic, if it's a trade, it's an exchange. If it's going to be a one-way traffic, it's not going to favor any country, whether it's America or Nigeria or Brazil or India. So it makes those countries to go in and sit down and have a conversation and begin to see, okay, some of these things you can do by yourself. It's not, it's a comparative advantage that takes place in this kind of stuff. So you look into your country inwardly and say, hey, we can do this. We don't have to buy. But those things that you really need, then you look for the people you're going to buy from at a price and conditions that are favorable to you. But you shouldn't be a dumping ground. America is a very consumer-driven economy. We buy a lot of stuff. We have a lot of junk. I mean, you go to any of our garages, we have things we have bought we don't use. But now a lot of people are looking at this, especially when the trade deficit is impacting us. So we want to see a way we're going to make money out of this stuff. China, India, Nigeria, anybody. You should look, every time you renew your relationships, You know, it's not one way, it's not a permanent thing. You know, a friend of yesterday can be a foe of today. So the most important thing is recognize why you are coming together and be able to sustain that relationship. You
talked about the revenue generation for the U.S., but every time he talks about these tariffs and come up with new tariffs, we see the disruption and the impact on the global financial markets, even in the U.S. We see what happens in Wall Street. Is there a broader strategy here for him in terms of navigating international trade relations?
Yes. I mean, again, Trump has the biggest microphone in the world. I mean, he's one president. If he says something, people get uncomfortable. But all that means is not the end of. It's all he wants to do, come to the table. And what are we talking about here? If it's the goods that you are manufacturing and selling to America, the Wall Street is just going to respond to emotions and cultures and policy statements. At the end of the day, the market is going to level. And so the world shouldn't panic. I'm not speaking for Trump. I'm not speaking for the administration. But the world shouldn't panic because of tariff. What you have to do is go in and negotiate for yourself. If Nigeria feels impacted, don't talk about Africa, talk about Nigeria. You cannot secure the pan until you secure the plate. All this idea of Pan-Africanism and no, talk about what affects your own particular country and leverage that. Maybe the other countries around you will now come together and want to create a relationship with you, but don't thinking about global terms. Think about specific countries and how that specific country relates to another country.
For those who have termed this bullying tactics, they say, look, first of all, his diplomacy is transactional, which is clear and obvious, but others say now it is clear, a bullish diplomacy.
Well, all of those can apply, but it's not bullying anybody because, the president of America can tell any country, except if you submit to be subdued. And what has happened, a lot of these countries have submitted to be subdued because they have given up on themselves. When I left Nigeria for America, my ticket from Enugu to Lagos to London to Dallas was 700 naira. 700 naira. Today, 700 naira can buy you a bottle of beer. So who do you blame for that? You got to look inwards. You got to look at your own financial regulations. You got to look at what was it that you were doing almost 40 years ago that has devalued your currency. And so America comes in back in the 80s through the World Bank and talk about structural adjustment program. It was what sapped the strength of Nigeria. It was what sapped every other country. So you shouldn't do that. If somebody wants to trade with you, you shouldn't get to the point where your own goods are being devalued and they are the ones who are getting
Well, it's easy to say that. When you're talking about smaller economies who largely depend on, maybe the U.S., not even China, maybe U.S. and some other countries for exports of their goods. I mean, they have to come to the table. They don't have a choice because their economy is really small. And it's for essential goods. They have to then depend on export to certain countries. And when that country say we're going to impose 35% tariff, it becomes really difficult in terms of production back home.
No, not necessarily, because again, whether small or big, the most important thing is your strategy and your structure. Again, I'm about negotiation. I'm about being able to step forward, and never you in a global relationship submit to be subdued. Because there's a psychology that deals with international relationships. Big countries are going to come in and want to talk to you, and get what it is they want. Just like when Africans talk about having mineral, it doesn't mean anything to the global economy because you're not producing. You don't have the technology. You don't have the financial means to even produce. So they're going to come over there and buy it at the price they want because you have no way to counter them. So what you want to do is go back and internally begin to develop your skill set. Most of these countries are so dependent on outside that a little policy just throws them off. No, you have to be guarded, you have to be strategic, and sometimes you have to say no. No in the Western country is what gets their attention. But if you just say yes, then they run you over.
Well, for countries that have said no, we saw more tariffs. But let's move on to his immigration policies.
Okay.
His immigration policies again have rattled the world. Where sometimes it's just a blanket policy for certain countries. Policies are usually, again, I said before, are based on the principle of reciprocity. But sometimes Trump acts out of that principle imposing, immigration policies and revising immigration policies?
Well, I mean, Trump is not doing anything an American president hasn't done. During Obama, there was deportation. In fact, Obama, in the history of America for the past 20 years, has done the most deportation. So what America is saying, or what Trump basically is saying, is this: come to America legally. Nobody, no country that has respect for itself and the respect for its own people is going to be an open door policy. Let's not forget Nigeria, back in the 80s, went in and said and told Ghana must go. I mean, these are two West African countries, and they did that. Immigration is a privilege, it's not a right. And when you start to demand that, privilege to become people are going to push back. Nobody wants their country to be broken into. So if there is an immigration law that America has that is affecting negatively a country, again, it prompts that leadership of that country to step forward and say, hey, what are we doing differently? Nigerians didn't used to have a problem going to America because the Naira was good money. Back in the 80s, if you showed up at the embassy, they gave you for I-20 and then you exchanged money and you went. That's how I went. But now, because Nigeria doesn't have the money, the Naira has become, I don't want to use the term, but that's what it is, a useless, worthless currency, then everybody's kicking back at Nigerians. Even Ghana is pushing back. Even Middle Eastern countries. Back in the 80s, Nigerian doctors used to go to Saudi Arabia and help them with their medical facilities. But now, who wants Nigeria? So what you got to do is...
But a lot of people are still recruiting from here in terms of human capital resource.
Because it's cheap.
We're still one of the best. But, we do have to leave it there. So much... thank you so much, Rather, for coming to the studio. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Well, thank you for having me.
Mr. Global Affairs Analyst.
Well, thank you for having me.